So what do you do? How do you respond? A couple of decades ago, my wife, Gloria, went from being perfectly healthy to permanently dead in under 2 weeks. Under 2 weeks. I was just in shock. I was just stunned into non-functioning. I could not function the grief. I never experienced grief at such a depth that my body was frozen in place. But Brueggemann is right. The church is uniquely positioned to aid in the guiding through grief. During my grief over my wife, I still had a teenage daughter at home. I had two sons off in college, a teenage daughter at home. And every night, every single night for a month, the good ladies of St. Philip's brought a meal to my front door. Every single night. And over the course of that month, I was able to start functioning again. Not a lot, but a little. There are various stages of grief if you follow the Kubler-Ross study, but one of it, the first stages is shock. And the second stage is denial. And for a lot of us in the first world, we're still in that shock and denial step because we don't yet know somebody that is suffering the effects of the climate crisis sufficient to want us to change our lives. And ultimately, the only way this gets handled is if we change our lives. And that's not easy. So the death we're going to experience, besides the human tragedy and the tragedy to the animal world and the vegetation world, is the death to a way of life where we don't care about how much we consume. We don't care about how much energy we use or where the energy comes from. We don't care about the pollution that we put out. We don't care about how it affects anybody else. The only way we get through this as a people, as God's people, is to begin to care, to begin to modify our lives. So we have to get through the shock, the denial, the anger, and move on to acceptance. Now, I have to tell you, this isn't just going to happen to somebody else. It's going to happen to you. And it's not going to happen once. It's going to happen multiple times because as you go into this crisis and you begin to understand at a deeper level just what's involved and who is being affected and how many people are being hurt, the grief will come. Now, one of the dangers is, and you'll hear this from some people, some of the advocates, is it's too late. It's not too late. It's not too late. And I'll show you why in a little bit when we get to hope. But one of the reactions of grief is I'm just going to go away. I'm just the heck with it. I'm just going to go up on a mountaintop and reflect. We can't do that because that means the costs will go even higher. The only thing that mitigates the cost in human lives and the cost in human society and the cost in the global life system is if we get involved. And so as you work through this, you're going to have to go into grief and you're going to need help getting through the grief. You're going to have to turn to others to help guide you through the grief to something you can latch onto. And one of the things I found that really helps is you get active. By getting active and taking those steps, you begin to move out of grief. We're on day one of the latest global conference for climate. It's called COP, Conference of the Parties. It's COP25. It's the 25th time that all the nations of the world are gathered together to wrestle with this problem. And we finally move past the point where some are saying, well, it's not really a problem. We're at least to the point everybody's saying, well, that's a problem. Now, the question is, what are we willing to do for our kids and our grandkids to stop this crisis before it escalates out of control? Before the cost just becomes staggering. No. Is there hope? There's hope. I got to tell you, as an engineer, we have the technical solutions. It's hogwash when somebody says, we can't afford to do it, we can't do it now. We have the solutions. And if we do the solutions, we actually not only save the planet and save lives, we save money. Now, why aren't we doing it? Well, there's a lot of money currently invested in the current systems. And people want to keep making money off of the current systems. And so they need to be challenged. So, can we roll the hope segment? Where do you get hope? Where do you get hope? I get hope from connecting with nature. I get hope from meeting other people. I get hope from putting on presentations and having people actively engage. I get hope from people responding. I get hope from seeing our youth get involved. I get hope by actually talking to politicians that care about the future of my grandkids and my great grandkids. So, Walter Brueggemann says hope is an absolute necessity. Otherwise, we just get mired in action. Okay. Can we move the slide program? The slides will show you once we get into them that the cost of the answers actually have become very cost competitive right now, extremely cost competitive. In the midst of near despair, this is Brueggemann, the prophetic task is to articulate hope, the prospect of a fresh historical possibility assured by God's good governance of future. People of faith got to have the understanding that God will be with us on this path. There's Paris, where I was for the 2015 Paris Agreement, where virtually every nation in the world agreed to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. All right. They agreed it verbally. They didn't put any enforcement in it, but they agreed it verbally. Why is it economical? Look at the cost of onshore wind. Look at how that has dropped down so significantly. Offshore wind has even gone even further. All right. Solar, wind, onshore and offshore have now become cheaper than coal. Texas is now using more wind than they do coal. Right. Scotland is making more electricity from wind than they use, and they export it to England and Great Britain because you have the offshore wind turbines in the North Sea, which is kind of funny because Scotland is the home of coal-fired energy. Okay, the thing to understand with photovoltaics is that enough energy comes from the sun every single hour that would power all our needs for a year. All you have to do is capture it, all right? Capture it. 1 hour, and you can power the earth, all the human population. There goes the capacity, all right, of solar cells. You can see how rapidly it's rising up. All right? Solar is now the cheapest source of new energy because the cost has come down dramatically. There's a solar park in India. India is still heavy into coal, One of the things we have to talk about is the Global Green Climate Fund. All right, remember the third world didn't participate in destroying the earth, so we need to help them go to renewable energy. Right? California reached 73% renewable electricity. 73%. The Vatican, the Pope has got solar cells. I say so. He's a big advocate for taking action on the climate crisis because he realizes what a cost that is to God's good creation. There's another kind of solar power, and that's where the heat is captured by intensifying the light onto them from mirrors up and melting salt. And that salt becomes a hot fluid that goes through the generator. And so it can power things after a good start. Chile's going to close 8 coal-fired power plants in the next 5 years and entirely renewable by 2040. Right. There is good news around the globe. Buses. There's a company in Minnesota that's already making urban buses for it. In fact, I don't know if any of you heard about the settlement from Volkswagen when they cheated on the diesels. Each state got some funds from that settlement for their diesel cheat. Illinois, my state, is using it to make buses electric. Solar installers are forecasted to be the fastest growing job in the US, closely followed by wind turbine technicians. In the US, there's already 5 times as many jobs in solar as there is in coal mining. We got to do more than just generate clean energy. We've got to find a way to use it more efficiently. And so building retrogrades to make them more efficient or high. This is a neat one. Look at this. These were all the coal plants that were planned to be built in those 20 years. And that's how many were canceled. You can breathe a little easier from it. You can eat fish without all the mercury from the coal going into the Detroit River. Over 180 global companies have already made a commitment to go 100%. And so if you're dealing with a company, one of the questions you should ask is, what are you doing to make the future better for my kids and my grandkids? There's the companies. If you spot a logo that, tell them thanks and ask them to show you the numbers that they're actually doing it. Agriculture is a huge thing. 20% of the climate crisis is caused by the way we've made factory farms in the chemical plants. Right? We got to find a way to do that better. And we've got the technology. We've got the technology to change that so that the farms actually become carbon sinks and take it out of the atmosphere. So regenerative agricultural principles, soil health, biodiversity, water quality, social and economic equity. That's important, the equity. Right? So we were in the Paris Climate Agreement, and we were the only country to back out of it. The only country. Out of 197 countries, we were the only one. And we just rejoined it 9 months ago. And now we're trying to become leaders in it again. We can only hope they're short memory. Here's what gets me excited, the youth. The youth are deep into climate justice. They have Fridays for the Future, where every Friday they do their climate protests. Right? There's Kenya, Uganda. We cannot eat coal. We cannot drink oil out of the mouths of babes. India, Fridays for the Future, climate justice. Spain. We don't have a planet B. If we ruin the planet we're on, there's not an alternative. We have to act to save this one. We've got 7.5 billion people on Earth right now. We've got to take care of them. God's calling us to act. Indonesia. This is the climate march in New York. I was in it. If you look real quick on the 3037th one on the right. Okay, no, I'm kidding. This picture, when it was first shown to us, should have changed how we looked on the Earth. It didn't, but it should have. Look at how fragile that Earth is. This is from the moon. Look at how fragile. One of the key functions of the church, according to Jim Mantell, one of my fellow pastors, is to help people find meaning as a join together and pursuing a common purpose. Organize a group in your church for the purpose of responding to the climate crisis. Jim Mantell, again, 3 things we have to do. Facing reality is a precondition of hope. Facing grief is a precondition of hope. Hope is an act of defiance. We will not accept that millions and millions and millions of people have to die for this. Okay, just a glimpse, all right? On my website, you're gonna find all kinds of resources if you wanna get into it. There's several different video programs that you can get into. If you wanna explore a deeper one, there's a Come and See series, there's 30 short videos on the website, focuses hope for the future through technologies. So we show you different technology ones. Project Drawdown, write that down. Project Drawdown is a analysis, it's a book, it's a great book on all the solutions that are available that will in fact resolve this crisis. So if you're a geek like me, you'll love it. But even if you're not a geek like me, you'll find answers in there you can use. And I tell you that over 1,000 gigatons of reduced carbon can be pulled out of the air very simply. 27 billion net costs, 75 billion net savings, right? Okay. On my website, you'll find 48 steps to a sustainable life. 48 steps. I always get to 48. I say, yeah, 48. All right. You're going to read some of them and you're going to say, I don't know why you even typed that. I've been doing that forever. And you're going to look at some other and say, well, yeah, okay. You're going to look at some other and you're going to say, you know what, Gallagher, Pastor Gallagher, you're crazy if you think I'm going to do that one. And my point is, in between the, oh, this is too easy and oh, this is too tough, there are things you can do that will make a difference. A mother and a son that were suing the national government says, this is an extraordinary time to be alive. Hope is found in the struggle. Hope is found in the struggle, indeed. Wendell Berry, it's all a question of story. We're in trouble right now because we do not have a good story. We're in between stories. The old story, the account of how we fit into it is no longer effective, yet we have not yet learned a new story. We need a story about sustaining creation. This is a woman you need to read, Kathleen Dean Moore. They'll want to know the story of this time. Our grandchildren will. This pivotal decade when we either found our way forward or did not. They will give our time a name. It is that important. It is that important. These 10 years. They will wonder if we saw it coming. They will want to know how hard we really tried to stop the destruction. They will want an accounting. They will want a book filled with the prayers that people prayed. They will want a jars filled with the lost of things as things die away. The point is that we are the ones who will create the story over time. And it's up to us to decide, what will that story be? What will it be? So what story will you tell your children to follow? What story will frame the rest of your life? Early on in my life, I grew up in poverty. And so out of that poverty, I had the message that I was never going to allow my children to have hard times. And so I became a workaholic as a plant manager. And along the way, I discovered I had lost the real values in life. Preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. What's really important is that you don't do these 48 steps in secret. You do them visibly. You invite others to participate with you. People will come to accept, to respond to this crisis when they see you and I do something about it. After the final no, there comes a yes. And on that yes, the future of the world depends. Wallace Stevens. So I encourage you, on the back of my 48 sheets, you'll see a number of resources that you can dig into from great places so you can go into further, because this is just, a half hour. I'm trying to do 3 days of workshop. It's just incredible. I really encourage you to dig deeper. Just Don't take my word for it. Dig deeper, but also reflect. Take some time to reflect on what is our God? What is our God calling you to do? Like that first Christian community where awe came upon everyone. And they all shared, and any took as they had need. And we didn't hold on to our excesses. We cared for each other. We cared for all of God's good creation. So, brief few minutes. I've overloaded you with information. I'll take your questions though. What have we got? John, are you unmuted yet? No. Well, we're waiting for John to get unmuted. I'll just give you another fact. You know, the rise in climate emergencies we've been having, both from the storms and the flooding and the droughts and the fires. My grandkids will experience 3 times that level in their lifetime to what I've experienced. My great grandkids will experience it 6 times if we keep on the path that we're on.
Pastor Terry, thank you so much for your amazing message, and we certainly need to hear that. First question for you. What can the faith community do together to respond to the climate crisis and give hope? Like, we can do things individually as congregations and denominations, but what do you think? What's your advice of how we should be working together and what should we be working on?
Okay. This is in several spheres, okay? The first sphere is we need to talk about it. For a while, it's been impolite to talk about it. When I would talk about it, people would look away, they would get uncomfortable, that doesn't belong in church. So the first thing is to talk about it. It's gospel to talk about it. Talk about it with each other, talk about it with your neighbors over the fence, but tell it with stories. Don't lecture, don't be prophetic, simply talk about how it affects you and why you're concerned about it. That's one thing. But do that over the backyard fence, do that in the church fellowship hall, do that from the pulpit. Now, on a regional basis, the churches can organize action because ultimately this requires action on a political level. I'm not talking Democrat or Republican, I'm talking government offices, laws, judges, legal actions. And the churches can unite to present a unified voice in addressing this. If you look, you'll find that every major church denomination, every major faith, from Hindu to the different elements of Christianity, to Islam, to Buddhist, every leader has spoken out on this. Everyone, right? Your presiding bishop has, my conference minister has, the Pope has, right? The Dalai Lama has, right? And we could just phrase those up in conversations. But the people who hold political office get their ears bent all the time by high-paid lobbyists. I've lobbied on Congressional Hill, just like Jack has lobbied on Congressional Hill. And we can tell you that we have sat in the outer offices and watched the person on the phone record on a spreadsheet every call that's coming in and what was the issue. And so if we get into a habit of calling, right, the online surveys that you click on, they don't really mean beans. You need to call, right? Writing letters is a good idea, but it takes 6 weeks to clear all the security to get a letter through. You can send an email, but the absolute best thing is to call. When there is a local public event with the politicians come back from the state capitol or come back from the national capital, attend that. And, you know, not to raise trouble, but simply to convey that as a person of faith, as someone who absolutely fundamentally believes that God has granted us a good creation and put us responsible for it, that we have to take action. That we have to take action. So voices, one-on-one, voices community to community, voices in the public sphere, voices in the political sphere, right? But above all, just like that saying is, preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use the words. St. Francis is supposed to have said that. What it means is action speaks louder. So if you want to do something as a church, do something that's green and advertise, talk about it, show it. Put out a big sign, say, hey, look over here, we got this. You know, whether it's a car charger in the parking lot, or it's a sustainable garden, or it's sustainable agriculture, or it's a solar cell up on the church roof, you know, talk about it, right? Schedule speakers to come in and talk about it. Share it, gather in groups. It needs to become everyday life. COP25 that's going on right now is going to have a lot of good words to it. Going to have a lot of good words. We're past the initial on the surface denial. There's still denial on the subsurface caused by the big money. And so as they come out of this global conference, we need to find a way to exert pressure on them so that they live up to those promises. All right, enough talk for that one, John.
Thanks, Pastor Terry. Next question up. What should our congregation do first? What's the first thing we should do?
You should talk, but you should listen. You should listen to each other, but you should also listen to the voices of the people who are already experiencing it. And you should pull in efforts to connect people to that, right? Not just where we throw some money at a problem, but we actually get involved on a human to human basis, right? But the absolute first thing to do is to talk and to listen. And then to act, whether it's my 48 steps or it's another action list that you follow, right?
Thanks, Pastor Terry. Next question. What other groups have you presented to or that you work with? This is coming from someone from the Southeast Michigan group of Sierra Club, I believe.
Okay, I have presented to Sierra Club. I have presented to anybody that's willing to sit still in my 10 years of doing this, besides the videos that I launch out. The videos, by the way, are downloadable, free. There's never a charge. But if you have trouble, you don't have that kind of high-speed internet, just send me a note and I'll ship you off a DVD. No problem. But I have presented at retirement homes. I presented in elementary schools. I presented in colleges. I presented in the public square. I have presented in churches. I've preached in the different churches. I've gone to Washington, D.C. and hosted. And so I'll work with anybody and everybody who seriously wants to help save our kids and our grandkids. Okay.
Thanks, Pastor Terry. I think you might get a few invitations out of this.
I'd be happy to come. Be happy to come. I'm triple inoculated. So
terrific. Here's a question from Pastor Jack. Once you told me that the climate crisis will drive the migration crisis. There are over 60 million refugees in the world. Even the US military has concern about how the climate crisis will drive migration.
Yep.
What are the parts of the world where the climate crisis is driving migration?
Well, the first one, the easiest one to tell you about is Central America. A couple of years ago, I went down to Honduras as part of an emerging group to study what is driving the migration from Honduras and Guatemala. What is driving it? You know, some people were there for economics, some people were there for violence. I was there for the climate and for environment. And it's not going to, it's already happening. People are gathering, trying to get into our boundaries, risking their lives, not because they want to mow our lawn, right? Not because they want to do our laundry. They're risking their lives because their kids cannot live where they currently live. Those droughts, those floods, those storms, those dead lands, that's a global crisis. More than 10,000 people have died. They've drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to escape from the inhospitality that we've made Africa and to Europe. The US military not only considers this a migration issue, they consider it a war issue. It's a threat enhancer. They've actually played war games on how they're going to respond to the climate crisis. Right? Because they know when people get hungry, when people get starving, when people can't sleep because their home is floating away, they will get desperate. And when desperate people get desperate, they will take action. What would you do? What would I do? If my kids can't live, if my grandkids can't live, and I'm a pastor, I'm going to take action. It's a threat enhancer. We can see that there are already 7 countries that are competing for the Arctic. Why? Because we've melted the Arctic ice. And you can now take a ship across the Arctic. Right? You can cut 14 days off the transportation loop from Asia to Denmark by going through the Arctic. Russia has chartered their ice crushers out to lead caravans of ships through the Arctic. But that's not the only thing. There are countries that are taking advantage of the melting ice to say, now we can go after oil and gas that we could never go after because it was buried underneath all that ice. We can go get it. And so the crisis is going to be compounded because they're going to seek economic gain by going after the very things that are causing the current crisis. Yeah. It's escalating. It's escalating. We need to put the brakes on it. We need to stand up and say, as a person of faith, this matters to me. This matters to me.
Wonderful. Pastor Terry, there's a crisis of trust in this country.
Yeah.
Recent polls show distrust of government is at an all-time high, distrust. So how do we get people to believe us is a question.
Yeah, I know. I have seen things this last couple of years that I just could not ever fathom what happened in my lifetime in terms of denial, in terms of science being ridiculed, in terms of facts being offered as alternative facts or just as good as real facts. I don't know how some people actually drive across a bridge anymore. If you don't believe in science, how can you dare drive across that bridge? In fact, how can you start up your car if you don't believe in science? Right? So how do we do trust? Well, we do it because we tell our life stories, our life experiences. Not, you got to believe me, but this is what I value. This is what I care about. And this is why I'm doing this. And so you move it away from a science talk. You move it away from a left or a right talk. And you simply talk about why it matters to me as a human being. And if we have a connection, then our connection can bridge across the relationship of shared values. One of the greatest climate talkers in the world is a young lady by the name of Katharine Hayhoe. She's a professor of climate science down in Texas. She's married to an evangelical pastor. And so she can talk to anybody. So if you get a chance to listen in on Katharine Hayhoe, do it. She'll just invigorate. One of her challenges was she went and addressed the National Association of Oilmen, right? How are you going to do that? She starts off by thanking you. She starts off by thanking them and establishing a shared value. Our kids. And then she moves on to us. We can't keep doing what we're doing because of our kids. So move it away from, you got to believe me, to, can I share why I care? Okay.
Thanks, Pastor Terry. You are a numbers person. You are an engineer by training as well as a theologian.
Yeah.
What's your take? What is the timeline for the climate change tipping point? Or have we already reached it?
Well, we have, but it's the rate of decline. Okay. So are you exponential or are you linear? Okay. We're right now tottering before we go into exponential. Right? So there is no denying, if you're into facts at all and numbers like I am, that we're already harming. We're already causing harm. Okay. The question is, how much harm has to be realized before we take action? Ultimately, we need an action based on the magnitude of World War II. That kind of action. And what I am afraid of is if you look at the cost to humanity that went in before we responded to that, if we have to do that similar, it'll be absolutely tragic. That's why people of faith have to get involved, because we don't need to personally feel the pain, because we can feel the pain in others. And so if we act now, we can change the ramp, the acceleration. We can slow it down and we can save lives, right? We can save lives.
Terry, you mentioned that we need to work together and advocate together. And how do we work together among denominations and faiths? Like what, I mean, is it the World Council of Churches? What's the institutional mechanism? Is there a need for one, and how do we work together?
You'll find that there are a number of institutions already active into it, all right? There's a book out that's got the faith leaders' comments from every single faith element on their advocacy for it. You can look at that. But what I find is that's somebody else. That's somebody else. And the question really is, what can I do? All right? And that's the missing thing. The faith leaders have spoke, and the politicians have blown them off. Right? They need to hear from the voters.
Right.
They need to know that this is an issue over whether I'm going to support you staying in office or not. How you're going to affect the lives of my kids and my grandkids is enough to determine how I'm going to vote. They need to hear that from each of us.
Thanks, Pastor Terry. Well, we promised you that we would try to get this done in an hour. I want to keep to that. So can I turn it over to Pastor Brandon now for some concluding thoughts and to end us with a prayer?
Thank you, everyone, for coming out and being a part of the Zoom interview. Thanks to Pastor Terry for presenting. And we hope that as we go back to our communities and our congregations, that we feel empowered and equipped to use our voices. Let us close with prayer. Let us pray. Creator God, maker of all things, redeemer of all things, thank you. Thank you for technology that allows us to have these conversations. Thank you for all of creation so that we can move through this world and care and love for our neighbor. As we leave this place, help our leaders to make decisions that will show care for the creation. Help us as individuals and churches and communities to make decisions that will show care for creation. This planet is what we have. You know, God has given it to us to move through and care for each other. Let us be good stewards of what God has provided. We thank you, God, and we love you for this chance to serve. And all the faith-led people said,
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So one last bit of advice. This is not a sprint. So don't go out and overwhelm yourself. This is a marathon. So start and do and proceed at a pace, and remember to rest and take care of yourself. Get connected to the real world, get connected to the spiritual world, get connected to nature, get connected to loved ones, get refreshed so you can rejoin and rejoin. Be at peace. God bless.